Welcome back, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed watching Tiny Tim, King for a Day. My name is Joshua Moore. I'm one of the programmers of the festival, the Jewish Film Institute. And it's my pleasure to welcome our guests here for a special conversation about the film you've just seen. We have with us director Johan von Sydow and producer Elizabeth Sheldon, and our special guest moderator, Joshua Granell, a filmmaker, event producer, and drag entertainer known as Peaches Christ. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I'll just get this conversation started. And I want to say thank you for joining us, Johan and Elizabeth. And thank you for making this really special, incredible film. I loved it. And I knew I was interested in Tiny Tim before seeing the film, and then it just completely blew my mind. So I guess getting started, I would say, how did you come to be interested in Tiny Tim as a subject? Because for me, as someone who was born in the 70s and grew up in the 80s, it really shifted my view of Tiny Tim, because I saw Tiny Tim mostly in that third act that you so eloquently lay out for us. And so it was more like a trivialized, kitschy performer that, of course, as a young aspiring drag queen, I was fascinated by Tiny Tim, but I had no idea that Tiny Tim was like the big superstar that he was. So I'm wondering, when you got the ball rolling, what your perceptions of Tiny Tim were and how it all got started.
I hadn't heard about him either, but it was like 9 years ago. I was doing another film about a Swedish artist who disappeared in the 60s, and his friend told me that when he loved Tiny Tim, and then he started laughing and his tears just ran. He was so moved by the remembering Tiny Tim. So I Googled him, and like in 5 seconds, me too was like, who is this guy? I want to see the documentary. And then I found out that there wasn't any. So I thought, maybe I can do it. So that was the beginning of it.
That's incredible. Yeah, maybe I can make a documentary, and then you did. Wow.
I was friends and colleagues with Malik Ben-Jelloul, who made Searching for Sugar Man, and he was struggling with that one at that point. And so I thought, he can do it. Why can't I? So that was the inspiration too.
Right. And how about you, Elizabeth? What was your perception or knowledge or familiarity with Tiny Tim before working on the project?
So like you, I was a child of the 70s. So I missed sort of that golden 1960s era. But I saw a lot of the influence that Tiny Tim had in paving the way for artists like David Bowie, Prince, any number who had built on this man who took his talents and really catapulted it into an art form. So for me, that was very interesting, because I know that in terms of his place in rock and roll history, it's not necessarily as firmly established as with other artists. And that to me is always an intriguing question. Like Johan mentioned, and you yourself, the third act was painful, and it's what lingers. But his story coming as he did out of a world in which he was really just a freak to hit national stardom, he paved a way for many artists who followed in his footsteps.
It must have been something.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Something that really struck people, because there was some kind of in the early 2000s they made a survey about who is the most well-known like trademark or most well-known character in culture in US, and he was like top 3, Tiny Tim.
That's amazing.
And that was like 2001 or 2002 or something. So he must have struck a nerve there.
Yeah, I mean, I've spoken with my parents since seeing your film, and it just really somehow I missed that he had been so successful. And so I think generationally, we probably experienced him in different ways. But I love your movie because it really lays it all out. And just those facts, like Johnny Carson, you know, both exploiting Tiny Tim in some ways, I think, you know, also being moved by Tiny Tim, seeing the power of that voice and the performance to realize. And actually, I want to get back to something you said, Elizabeth. The fact that this wasn't just a freak, you know, the way we use the word freak now, but literally this person, I had no idea, was part of an actual freak show, then could become so famous, the biggest star in the country, you know, on the Tonight Show, that is what did they say, the second highest rated, you know, television episode or whatever. It's extraordinary, you know, and
He
so
broke.
yeah, go ahead.
He broke cultural barriers in a way, in a period when those barriers were very well established, and people who were different, there wasn't a lot of, you know, they were in the freak show, right? They were down in the village performing, you know, they didn't have a lot of opportunity. And the fact that he went as far as he did and found the success that he did, I think it's clear in the film that it was, but I think it was a shock to him. I don't think, you know, it's almost like Elvis Presley. Like, what do you do when you make it this, you know, when you're this big?
Yeah.
Yeah, that is so inspirational in many ways, but also as a drag performer who, you know, is named after Jesus, and intentionally kind of created a situation for myself where my performance was more of a hobby. I never imagined it would become a career in any way, shape, or form, and when it did, and it has, I'm still surprised by it. But what I love about this, I know we've mentioned it, is we know that David Bowie is someone who paved the way for myself, Divine, you know, these trailblazers. But with Tiny Tim, what I didn't realize is in every way, this person, not conventionally attractive, you know, the gender expression is bizarre. And, you know, it like you say, like a literal freak. And to reach the levels of success that he did, you know, for people like me, I just have to be really grateful, because, you know, he really did tear down a wall that there's no one before Tiny Tim, I was thinking, who you could say did this, you know.
You wonder what his life would have been like if he had been a performance artist today, because the environment's so different, how he might have expressed himself differently, or his, you know, manifested differently in an environment where things weren't so binary.
Right. So I have to get into some of these questions that I'm assuming the audience was thinking, because I was thinking them. The sexuality part of the story is very surprising, I think, the way it's laid out, because I think when you get to the sort of the story early on, also, I really enjoyed the animation. So I'm going to come back to that in a moment. And I really enjoyed Weird Al Yankovic's reading of the journal entries, which I'd like to ask about as well. But with the sexuality, it's almost presented in this sort of way that it's like, well, of course he was caught in bed with a man, you know, and you think, you know, where this is all going to lead to, and then it takes a total U-turn, and you find out that he was super into women, and especially young girls. And, you know, was that, how did you, well, I have a lot of questions. One is, was he bisexual? Do you have a sense for what his sexuality was? What, you know, and, you know, there's that scene with his friend that, you know, in his widow, where they talk about the 13-year-old girl, and it's very dark and very disturbing. And so I'm wondering, as filmmakers, like how this was uncovered, and what your sense is just personally about his sexuality, and whether or not he was a pedophile. You know, these you know, questions linger.
I would say that maybe he was bisexual, at least at early ages, when he was in love with that boy. That's possible. And I mean, his journals are hundreds of pages describing this guy, Bobby.
Oh, wow.
And but still, probably they never did anything like sexually. It was all in his fantasy, I think. I mean, there is nothing written about that. So it might have been like 10 years love, but only platonic, I think. And then there is in his journals, sometime in the 60s, I must stop this fooling around with men. Now it's women from now. So it's like it was a decision of his, like, I can't do this. It's too hard or something like that. And then the pedophile or not, I don't think that he was a pedophile, but I think in a way, maybe he mature-wise stopped at the age of 14, 15, 16. That's an impression. When you read his journals, even as an adult, he's very immature often. And so maybe he feels like he's a teenager. So like 14 years olds are appropriate for him, but I'm not sure. And there are also no teenagers that reported anything. It was also only in his mind, and okay, this was a telephone call, but no physical evidence has occurred.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And how did you access the journals? Did you know that they existed? Because what an incredible treasure for your film. And then to piggyback on that, how did it lead you to think of Weird Al, which I think was so inspired and really well done, and then to, you know, what was the process of animating those journal entries like?
That's 10 questions.
I know, I'm sorry.
You have to go course in journalism.
Right. Well, we'll start with how did you access his journals?
It was, I mean, from when I started like 9 years ago, I immediately found out that there was a guy, Justin Martell, in New York, who was planning to write biography, Tiny Tim's biography. So I contacted him, and we have been working together for all this time. And it was like maybe 5 or 6 years ago that he got a call from a guy who was one of Tiny's manager's children, a son of one of his mafia managers, who said, I found a bag of Tiny's journals. Do you want to buy them? So somewhere in South Carolina, I think. So Justin went there, and I think he said that I only want to sell them to Miss Vicky. So they had to go through Miss Vicky, and then Justin got them. So that was really, he had to rewrite. He was almost finished. He had almost finished the biography, so he had to rewrite everything and read all the diaries. It was like 20 years of diaries, so it was fantastic, of course.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And then next, so you have this, which is incredible, because I mean, I think, you know, for the biographer, obviously, well, maybe not so incredible because he had already written the book, but, you know, at least as a documentarian, to have this part of your source material is so great. And then what led you to choose Weird Al and animation as your way for presenting that part of the story?
I mean, we were thinking for a while who could do this best, and I think it was Elizabeth's idea to ask.
I'll take credit for that idea.
Yeah,
great.
Being, you know, one member of this team, the Weird Al Yankovic was my idea, and it was I was in conversation with someone about the project, and they said, well, you know, Weird Al Yankovic really admired Tiny Tim and has always said that he traces his lineage back to Tiny Tim in many ways. And, you know, Weird Al has remained in the spotlight, and he has his, you know, large following. And when we reached out to him, he was very enthusiastic about the project. So it was such a natural fit. It's not like we went, you know, through 6 or 7 people approaching them, because Tiny Tim's such a unique fit person, And, some people embrace him and celebrate him for what he is. And other people might have said, well, yeah, no, that's not quite, won't work for me. Weird Al was immediately intrigued and came on board, and it worked really well.
Yeah, he's doing it amazingly. And he told me a funny story when he was like early 15 years ago. He was at a Ringo Starr concert, and in the middle of the show, Ringo Starr said, "Oh, we got a celebrity in the audience," and he had the spotlights on Weird Al and said, "We got Tiny Tim here." and Tiny had been dead for like 5 years, so. But Weird Al, he still doesn't know if Ringo Starr was joking or if he thought that it was Tiny.
That's a really good story.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then some of the other incredible source material that you had actually came from one of your interview subjects. It looks like Jonas Mekas was filming Tiny Tim, I guess, from the very beginning almost.
Yeah,
and
like
that seemed
1963, I think it was the first, or 62 even. So yeah, he was really early.
And did he actually provide you with that archival footage? Did he still have it, or?
Yeah. Yes.
Wow, that's great.
I was at his
Jonas
place.
Mekas was a treasure trove.
Yeah.
And then I saw that you dedicated the film to Jonas Mekas and D.A. Pennebaker, and so. Wonderful that you were able to include them in the movie before we lost them. Two extraordinary filmmakers. One thing that I wanted to ask about was, I felt like it was fascinating to me that he had a daughter, and I wonder how it was it difficult getting her to appear in the film? And then of course we notice that her mother only appears in audio form, right? We don't have an on-camera interview. And so I'm wondering if you tell me what it was like approaching, those more intimate family members of his, and, how was that?
Yeah,
getting them to be involved?
At first, Miss Vicky said that she wanted to do an interview, and then she changed her mind maybe a couple of times. I don't remember, but I mean, she have had quite a lot of distress, and it's been a painful part of her life, that being married to Tiny Tim. So at least finally she felt that this won't bring me any happiness to talk about it and be on the screen. So finally she said no. And Tulip was, when we tracked her down, she said, well, yeah, I can talk, but she never lived with Tiny, so she didn't have that vivid memory and so many stories. But she was nice, and she read the diaries, and she felt that, yeah, it was my father, and he was okay.
Yeah, you get the sense that he's her father, literally, but that he probably wasn't much of a dad. No. Like she doesn't refer to, you don't sense that sort of affinity, that there was a distance probably there. And the fact that you say that she never lived with him kind of explains, that. Yeah. And I thought it was really interesting, I don't remember which wife it was. Maybe it was Miss Vicky, who talked about how this idea that Tiny Tim would ever settle down or live a normal life was ridiculous, and that all he really wanted to do was perform, and that he's one of those people who, and if you're in the entertainment world, you sort of know these people that are really only themselves on stage or in front of a spotlight or while they're performing. And then when they're not, they can be very like dark and complicated and bizarre. And, as a performer and an entertainer, I mean, I know these people, and it's almost like a specific thing. And it felt like Tiny Tim probably had that, where, maybe off stage, he wasn't the most fun.
No, I don't think he knew how to live an ordinary life. He just wasn't fit for that. And he never ate a meal. I mean, all the friends, we never ate with him. Artie Butler, who was the arranger, he said that Tiny was at our home once, met my wife, and we should have dinner. And he said, "Oh, no dinner, please. Can I have a spoon? Where's the bathroom?" So he went into the bathroom with a spoon and his bag. He had something to eat for himself in the bathroom. So that was Tiny Tim.
Wow.
Yeah.
And did it ever come up that, maybe he was on the spectrum, or, perhaps, had some autism? Because, I don't know very much about this, very cursory, but I wonder if back then they wouldn't have recognized certain things that maybe would be recognized today.
Yeah, Miss Sue, his widow, third wife, she has a lot of theories about that. And I think autism was one of the things that she thought that Tiny suffered from.
Yeah, I mean, that part of the story, I love that part of the third act, because I do hope that they were able to bring, happiness to each other. But it's so raw, this idea of her being asked, are you attractive? Are you thin? It's just so off-putting, but yet you also accept it that almost it was beyond his, he wasn't cruel, he just didn't know any better. Like you say, you get the sense that he had a stunted maturity.
Yeah. And there is one turn that's not in the film, unfortunately, or how you should say it, but he had met Miss Sue, and they are talking about getting married, but he's still not divorced from Miss Jan, the middle wife, but they don't live together. And then the Tonight Show with Jay Leno is asking, do you want to get married in the second marriage in Tonight Show? And Tiny thinks that's a great opportunity, and it's good. He wants Miss Jan to get her time in the limelight, but they are already married. So, but we can renew our vows. So they do that in the Tonight Show with Jay Leno. It's horrible. They are just mocking them horribly. Yeah. Oh. And then, the day after, they files the divorce papers, and then he can marry Miss Sue.
Yeah, that is. It's stranger than fiction, yes. the story of it all. And I'm just so glad that you made this story. Another person that kept coming up in my mind as far as a pulp culture, a child of Tiny Tim's, if you will, was Peewee Herman, and the idea of, what Paul Reubens was able to do in the 80s, especially when you see Tiny Tim in the early part of your film with children. It's so there's such an innocence to that kind of gender. Kids don't know to call, each other names. We teach them that. We teach them that a man is supposed to act this way. And, one thing I really loved about the Tiny Tim shots in front of the children was that, the way we as adults would see this person is as a freak, scary, bizarre, effeminate, maybe a pervert, all these things, but kids don't see him that way. And similarly with Paul Reubens and Peewee, Peewee was a sissy, Peewee was, girly acting. And so I think in many ways, Tiny Tim kind of led the way, for a Peewee Herman.
Yeah, but he wasn't comfortable with children. Maybe children enjoyed him, but he felt very strange to children. He was supposed to have a children's show on television in 69 or 70. His manager was working very hard for that, but Tiny said, no, I can't work with children. So that was part of when the downslope began.
Okay. Now that next question as a film person and a movie lover and a performer is, have either of you considered or thought about a narrative film version? And if so, is there an actor that you would think could play Tiny Tim?
Weird Al Yankovic.
Agreed.
I think we should call him up and talk about this. Johan, what do you think?
I know there are people talking about it, but it's around Justin and his book, and I haven't heard anything for a while, but there were plans, and then Sacha Baron Cohen was a hot name for playing time.
Yeah.
That actually would be pretty great. I think, Weird Al, Sacha Baron Cohen, those are great choices for sure.
Yeah.
So one thing I did actually want to ask before we wrap up is, if you got a sense for how religion or his upbringing, the Christianity or the Judaism, I noticed there was a sort of a statement about Jesus Christ on a wall that showed up a couple times in the movie. So I was wondering if, with all of those, his sexuality and maybe blocking parts of himself, how much do you think his religious upbringing, which seems to be, I don't know, I don't understand it. If you could speak.
No,
to
I
that.
would say he didn't have a religious upbringing at all. His parents were communists and I think atheists, but his mother was Jewish and his father was a Christian Arab. But it was like when he was around 20 that somehow Christ struck him, and like overnight he was extremely religious and kept that for the rest of his life. So every page on the journal starts with, "Dear Lord, thank you, Lord," every day.
That is fascinating,
Yeah.
because that the idea that you would be raised with, parents who don't sort of cram that down your throat, it is an interesting thing to come to it later. And it does make you wonder if, a lot of people, I mean, of course, I grew up Catholic. And so it was no secret that a lot of nuns and a lot of priests turned to religion to maybe not, confront certain parts of their sexuality or, things that wouldn't be accepted by their community. Not that that's what was going on with Tiny Tim, but just the fact that he would become so, it doesn't even seem like maybe he was religious. Maybe it was spiritual or, into Jesus. Yeah. So where can folks, see the movie again, and what's happening with the movie? And of course, I think I speak for everyone who watched it tonight online. We loved the movie. We want to send our friends to see the movie. How can we do that?
The movie will open April 24th in New York. And I believe we will be that same weekend on 3 screens in the Bay Area, in San Francisco, Berkeley, and Marin. So you'll have another opportunity to see the film in the theater, the COVID gods willing. And then we're working on seeing where it will find a home on TV or an SVOD channel afterwards.
Well, fantastic. Yes, I think one of the things I'm most looking forward to is getting back into a cinema and seeing a movie on a big screen. So,
with
gladly
popcorn.
with popcorn and a Diet Coke, and also just to enjoy a festival experience. I think everyone's making do with what we can, and certainly this festival has done a great job of presenting their content online and setting up things like this. But it'll be nice to be together and experience a movie like yours with a group of people in person. So I personally will be glad to bring friends to see the movie in the Bay Area when it opens. Yeah, good. Congratulations. It's fantastic. Bravo. Wonderful job.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Kudos to you, Johan.